Good morning. I thought what I could talk about today is my learnings from my PhD, and to touch on things that I think that are not very well spoken about during the training of most researchers in technical fields. So I'll introduce my research and bits about the background of my research. So my research aimed to understand the basic knowledge that is required to base the management and regulation of the shark fishery in the region. So the shark fishery has quite, that's the pointer, can I flip? Yeah. So it has quite a long history that goes back to the Chinese civilization. And what was important about it is the shark fin soup, if you've heard about it. It's a delicacy that represents high status and respect that is used in important business meetings. And that wasn't really the problem at that time. It became recent problems after the blooming in the Chinese economy, which increased the number of the people demanding the shark fin soup, using it more in weddings and their business meetings. That got spread into different parts of the world and targeting mostly countries with low enforcement of their management and fisheries. So in the region, we have 3 countries that are listed among the top 20 shark catching countries, which puts a lot of pressure and effort on our small seas. So from there, the interest in our research stemmed into focusing on 4 main questions. I'll briefly introduce the questions so I can lead into my learnings after that. So this is actually some of the sites, just to represent how big is the landing in the region. And my first interest was to understand the movement of sharks. So I did a population study, and it was mainly to understand the movement of sharks in the region. And from there, we can actually design the size of the marine protected areas and the shape of it. Then I wanted to understand a very important and a behavior that I found is particularly interesting, which is called polyandry. And that's behavior, it's a phenomena where female would mate with multiple males during one reproductive cycle. And it was very specific in sharks because mating is quite aggressive, and females sometimes they would end up with really bad injuries. So if the cost is really high in females, then the benefit would be very high, and it would be easier for us to measure it. The third interest was to understand the genetic basis of mate choice and to see if actually males are choosy or opportunistic. And if they're choosy, what would be the female characters that makes them actually more interesting? And that would serve more if actually bigger females that would be more attractive, then we actually have to protect bigger females. But what really came to a surprise to me is that this chapter, which really changed the way how I think even about science and information that I gain. And that was the section where we wanted to interview the fishermen so we can quantify the change in the shark abundance in the region. And the reason why we wanted to do this is because there wasn't really any documents or historical documents that quantified the abundance of sharks at those days, so we can compare it to today. So the way around it is actually to talk to different fishermen from different, am I on? Yeah. So to talk to different fishermen and segregate them based on age group, so we can compare what the older fishermen quantify as normal compared to the younger ones. And to my surprise, it really made me witness something called the shifting baseline syndrome, where the younger fishermen, their perception of what's normal is completely different than what is really normal. And that made me realize that sometimes what we really know, or maybe something that we don't know, we don't really know that we don't know. So I went back to Cambridge, to our department, with 2 changing mindsets. The first thing was my change in perspective of fishermen, that I was always taught that fishermen were actually the driver of the problem,
but I've realized that fishermen were actually the victims of this problem. The other mindset was that, what would be the limit of my knowledge? There would be a lot of things that I think I would know, but I don't really know. And not only that, but can I access some of the things that I don't really know? Do I have limits? So I met Dr. Susanna Huzel, who was giving a talk in Cambridge, and she leads a lab that actually developed a new method to look at the number, to quantify the number of neurons in the brain. And I remember her asking us if we know the number of neurons in human brain. And we were quite excited, and we all said, yeah, well, we remember it from 101 neuroscience textbooks, and that's like 100 billion neurons in the human brain, and that's like, a piece of cake. And she said, well, we found out that this is not actually a true information. And they proved it. And we couldn't really find what was actually the source of that information. It's being taught until today, but it's not really referenced, and we don't know much about it. And here I've realized that it doesn't really matter what kind of information you know. What's even more important is how much do you know about it. And I'd like to share with you one example and see if you can help me with sorting this out. So there's these two facts that are actually still taught nowadays in high school textbooks. But one of these two facts is actually a myth. So if I can see like a show of hand for the map of taste buds, do you think this is a fact or a myth? Myth? How about shivering is a reflex of your body to warm your body? A myth? So actually the myth is the taste buds. So no one really knows. So it was actually a German scientist that did this experiment, and it is being repeated. But that made me realize that a lot of the information that we take as facts is actually a product of repetition rather than experimentation. And that kind of made me realize that there might be a lot of other facts that we use until today that we think that they are really facts, but they are quite myths. And that's fine, because science is in progress, and it's a process of, it would be revised. But what I would like to point in here is actually not really demeaning facts at all, but maybe probably place them in a better perspective where we don't idolize them and they don't block us from exploring. I think the best way actually to handle facts is, as Socrates says, like always approaching a new question, knowing that you don't know much about it, like rather than using the facts to frame your boxes. And I think facts are very important in forming our questions, in basing our, I would say, questions to enter in areas of ignorance in science. I do believe that ignorance is the main driver in science, but what I think would be and here I don't really refer to ignorance as a willful individual ignorance, but I would refer to it as more of the lack of clarity and understanding in some of the areas and fields of science. And I think it would be more interesting nowadays, in this time, to provide students with the tools to actually enter this area rather than shying away. I find that the education system in general is actually interested more in accumulating knowledge, dealing with facts, making sense of these facts, but kind of shying away from using these facts to form the question so we can actually know what's the limit of these facts and how to access the area of ignorance. And I came across this guidelines of the German university that was listed in 1949, and I find it very interesting that at that time, the main interest in the lecturer was not actually what they knew or how much information they could convey, but what it was more important for them to have this ability to show the boundaries of their knowledge and the boundaries of the facts and be able to access beyond these. So at the end, I think education should be a process rather than an accumulation of knowledge. And by this, I'd like to thank all the fishermen that really inspired my journey and my new realization. the fishermen that I call living libraries. They just have a wealth of knowledge, and I think we're underestimating their knowledge. And I would like as well to thank Tomouh for giving me this opportunity, as well as every one of you for your full attention. Thank you very much.